Hey, Clemson family, let's catch up on offensive coordinator Brandon Streeter talking about the outlook for playing time for a couple of key freshmen who certainly can't be considered secret weapons anymore after an offseason full of praise for them. We'll also look at a couple of former Tigers who are opening eyes during the NFL preseason.
I'm Daniel Shirley. We'll talk with Grace Raynor from The Athletic about Clemson recruiting. We'll look at the incoming freshmen and we'll look ahead to next year's class as well.
I'm Bill Zimmerman, and welcome to episode 17 of the Supreme Alway podcast. Go ahead and tap that subscribe or that follow button so we can keep you up with the latest big happenings in Clemson sports, and you won't miss out. You can find our homepage at clemsonkickoff.com. We've got all the major podcast apps linked there, or you can just search your favorite app for Clemson. We're on Twitter at Clemson Kickoff, and we also upload our audio to youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff, and we post some shorts there when big news breaks as well. Wherever you listen, we are glad you found us. Well, first, let's get into Brandon Streeter talking about some key freshmen this year. Really, the bigger of the two that he mentioned prominently is Blake Miller, probably stepping up as a freshman and starting at right tackle. In fact, Streeter says that he is in the current starting five. That's as of Monday, so that's 2 weeks to go until the road opener against Georgia Tech. Here's what Streeter had to say to reporters on campus today, courtesy of TigerNet.
He's got a really good big picture for a freshman. I mean, it's very, very much like a Mitch Hyatt type deal where, came in and just really understands the game, which is hard to do at offensive line when there's so many moving parts. It's hard to do that at a young age. A lot of times it takes a little bit longer for those guys. And then he brings a toughness every single day. I mean, there's no question at all that he is one of the toughest guys we got.
And to see that complete interview, go on over to tigernet.com. So, Daniel, does that change your thoughts on the O-line in any way?
I think it does. I guess there's two ways to look at it. He's that good, right, as a true freshman, that he is stepping into the starting lineup from day one. And then you also could look at it, well, then is somebody else not stepping up? So I guess we won't know the answer to that, Bill, whether this is a good thing or a bad thing until we get to that first game and maybe even 2 or 3 games into the season once the competition gets a little bit tougher. But I'm excited to see what Blake Miller brings to the team. I know everybody's going to go to the Mitch Hyatt situation when he started as a true freshman on the offensive line. It's similar, I guess, in that they were both true freshmen, but it's a little bit different situation because I think Blake Miller needs to start at that spot for the best 5 to be on the field. And what this does is it moves people around into their best spot. So really, really excited about that, and we'll see how it plays out.
You kind of read my mind. We hadn't talked about it. I didn't have it in the pre-show notes that we look at, but exactly that either or. Either he's that good or nobody else is stepping up to hold off a true freshman, even though Miller's an early enrollee, which increases his odds of being productive early and out of the gate. This is also more of a choice thing than, say, Marcus Tate last year, who was really needed with some injuries in that interior line. Tate kind of struggled, but now a lot of growth as a result of those snaps that he took last year, the lessons that he learned from it. We'll see how Miller compares, won't we?
We will. And I feel a lot better about the offensive line right now than I did going into the Georgia game last year. That was a huge concern for me going into the season, mainly because of the way the offensive line played the year before. And in 2020, you had Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne to cover up some of those issues, and that wasn't there last year. So I was worried about the offensive line after 2020, even though the offense put up a lot of numbers. And then those concerns played out in 2021. But I do feel a lot better about this group right now. Walker has played tackle, but he's a guard, and he was playing tackle out of necessity. So if this makes guard stronger, and then Miller is able to play really well at tackle, where you're really strengthening 2 positions. So, again, we won't know until the games start, but I feel good about this group right now, and I think this is going to be a plus.
The other big name that was mentioned was Cade Klubnick, and Brandon Streeter talking about with conviction, in fact, that Klubnick will play this year. You had to assume that was going to be the case, but to hear him say it as firmly as he did, I think brings a new perspective to just how close the quarterback battle is. Here's a soundbite. This is again via TigerNet.
Yeah, I mean, Cade's going to play. I mean, there's no doubt about it. He's going to play. How much is hard to tell. We're still a couple weeks away. And that's always based on, what we're doing on offense and how we're moving the ball and all those things take a big part of it too. So I got a lot of confidence with him, and with the first group, second group, it doesn't matter. I mean, I feel really good about where he's at.
And that bite is also part of a complete interview that you can find at TigerNet. Now, talk about the either or again, Daniel. I've kind of assumed that DJ Uiagalelei would be the clear number one in the room, and the coaches have said the same. But to your Streeter being that definitive again at this point of the offseason about Klubnick, I think means that they're happy with both quarterbacks' performance in camp. I don't think that Streeter comes out and says things like this in this way if you're trying to safeguard your starter. What it says to me is there should be no worries about a quarterback controversy, even though they are confident in Klubnick being a capable backup to Uiagalelei.
I think you're right. I don't think there is a controversy. It feels like DJ is still the number one guy. Dabo Swinney has said that. He's the number one guy. But they also, Bill, they have a history of if you're good enough to play and you do the things we want you to do in practice, you're going to play. And that you can't not do that at quarterback if you're going to do it at every other position. So I really feel like that's the case. It feels like Cade has made big strides since the spring. Brandon said that during the interview with David Hood this afternoon. So I really think that you're seeing both of these quarterbacks step up. And if that's the case, I mean, watch out, because if the offensive line comes together and then both quarterbacks are playing well, this offense could have something special this year.
They've been trying to get Klubnick to add weight, and there's nothing new there. That was what Trevor Lawrence needed to do. That was what Deshaun Watson needed to do. We'll see how that translates to him maybe being able to get the ball to receivers quicker, the speed that you need on a screen pass or the ability to squeeze a ball through a window out there into a receiver's hands before it closes. So that'll be one of the things. And then also, just the knowledge of the playbook. How deep can he get into that playbook rather than have to go out there and kind of freelance a little bit or work off of a limited number of play calls?
Cade is more confident. And when you're confident in what you're doing, you play better. For the most part, I believe that's what we're seeing here. But I also feel like DJ is still the leader of this team. We've heard that from all the coaches. We've heard that from some of the other players. Jordan McFadden has said that DJ is one of the leaders of this group. And I think you're going to see that play out early in the season and throughout the season coming up.
You can subscribe to us at youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff, and that'll help you stay up to speed on analysis of the biggest news in Clemson sports. Well, we're joined now by someone who's really familiar with the Tigers after several years on the beat in Clemson, most recently for theathletic.com, now branching her talents into covering recruiting as well, Grace Raynor. Really appreciate you joining us as our first beat writer to talk with us. Grace, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are y'all doing?
Doing great. Thanks for being here, Grace. We really appreciate it. When we look at recruiting for Clemson, you've covered this program for a while. What's been the biggest change in recruiting, do you think, since you've been covering the program?
I would say it's kind of the way that Dabo Swinney approached the recruiting trail this past year. I mean, obviously, Daniel and Bill, you guys know as well as anyone, he kind of does his own thing, and he hasn't ever hosted official visitors in the summer at Clemson ever until this year. And so I think that's been the biggest change. And all of a sudden you look up and the season hasn't even started yet. And then the class of 2023, they have 20 commits already. So I think that's probably the biggest part of it. And I think in many ways he had to shift that mentality a little bit just with the given the way college football is changing and the landscape of the sport. But I think he gets knocked a lot for maybe being a little stubborn, but I give him credit here for adapting in that way.
You wrote a lot about that this summer, and we've also read a lot about the transfer portal, and people have kind of dinged him for not jumping into the portal. But do you think it helps, actually, that he's been loyal to these players when he's recruiting so he can say, hey, look, I'm not just going to turn my back on you and go get a transfer?
I think that when he communicates that to his locker room, that's definitely received for sure. I mean, I still think that he probably should have gone a little harder after an offensive lineman in the portal this offseason. And I think that was the one area where they did have some need and they didn't really get it done in the portal. But that's something that he has talked about this summer as well. I think his quote was like, the more that the recruiting landscape and the more that college football changes and the more chaos it creates, the better it is for Clemson. And he sees that as an opportunity to say, hey, during this time when everything is going nuts and offers are nuts and the portal and all this good stuff, here's what we have. Here's what we're sticking by. He's taken a lot of flack for saying that the transfer portal is in his locker room. But yeah, I mean, those guys seem to believe it. And I think that you have to give him credit because you look up after spring practice and they had no transfers after spring practice, which I thought was really, really remarkable in a lot of ways.
Let's look back at the class that these guys are going to be freshmen this year. I know there were some decommitments late and they lost out on some players late, but they still have a good class coming in. Who do you think is going to be the biggest impact player in this class for this 2022 season?
Just looking up and down this list, I think there's a lot of contenders. I mean, normally I think we would lean towards the quarterback. So Cade Klubnick obviously pops off the page immediately, especially just given Clemson's quarterback situation last year. So I think he gives them some depth in a way that they didn't have last year. I would have said Adam Randall for sure before he tore his ACL. It seemed like they were really excited about him. Antonio Williams, rave reviews about him in the summer. I think he can help them in the slot. And then we talked about this a little bit off air. Blake Miller seems to, I haven't been at camp because of the way my job has shifted, but I've read a lot about Blake Miller and just the way they seem to be really impressed with him as a true freshman offensive lineman, which, as we know, is not an easy position for him to jump into. So yeah, I mean, just looking up and down, they got a lot of guys that I think can contribute pretty early.
When you hear that about an offensive lineman, Grace, you've been covering this for a while now. I mean, it is unusual. That's special, isn't it? I mean, I think that says something about a young guy if he can come in and play offensive line right away.
For sure. I mean, they recruited him as a tackle. I'm assuming that's what they're keeping him at. But I mean, even that to have him play the tackle spot early. But yeah, I mean, this is a position that is just not easy for any true freshman to come into. It's probably one of the most developmental positions, as y'all know, on the roster. And then B, Clemson in particular, they ask a lot of their offensive linemen. They ask them to cross train and they put a lot on them early. And so for him to be this far ahead, I mean, physically, I also think he came in really developed. 6'6", 315 is what he was listed at on 24/7. So I think that's a huge part of it. But yeah, really, really impressive.
Grace, you've written about Cade and you've talked to his coaches in high school. What do you think he brings to the program from what you've heard through the recruiting process?
I think the biggest thing that Cade brings is he has played on the biggest stage of high school football that there is, in my opinion, in the country. I mean, when you are winning back-to-back state championships in Texas, you know, that's a big deal. He's playing in front of 15, 20,000 people in these state championship games. So I think that's part of it. He'll have the poise. And then you talk to his high school coach, and we probably spoke 7 or 8 months ago. This is when Cade was still in high school, but he was just talking so much about his speed and about how he is so fast. He was a track guy for a while, just the athleticism. And so he had felt like Cade might have gotten dinged a little bit because people would kind of put him into this dual threat box because he was super fast. And they were like, no, he's still a throw first quarterback, but he can just move. And the way that he scoots kind of got in this dual threat label. But as important as anything, I think he just gives them some depth behind DJ and challenges him if they need to kind of reevaluate that quarterback position.
Yeah, that certainly seems to be something they needed, especially after the way we saw quarterback position play last year. Well, they've got their quarterback for 2023 as well with Christopher Vezina. So they're stacking quarterbacks on top of quarterbacks. What have you heard about Christopher as he comes in for next year's class?
Yeah, I mean, he got his 5th star, first of all. So that was a big deal on 24/7. I think he's a top 20 recruit now. I think he fits the culture of Clemson's program a lot. And it's kind of a similar situation with Cade. You know, Cade was waiting for Clemson only offers one quarterback at a time. They had offered Ty Simpson, who chose Alabama. And then they immediately went on to Cade, and Cade didn't commit anywhere else because he wanted to go to Clemson. And of course, we all know in the class of 23, Clemson went after Arch Manning pretty early. But the second that Arch kind of moved on, they shifted to Vezina. I think a lot of people think that Vezina is one of the best quarterbacks in this class, but I think he just really wanted to be at Clemson, and that's a good culture fit for both of them.
What have you heard about Peter Woods as well? He's one of those guys who jumped off the screen at you when you watched the film, and 5-star guy as well on the defensive line.
Totally. I mean, first of all, what a win for Clemson on the recruiting trail. I give Nick Eason a ton of credit on that one to go into Alabama and go take the 3rd best player in their state, a guy that I think we all thought would have been a lock to Alabama. I think that's really impressive. And something I think we were all a little curious about when Todd Bates left Clemson to go to Oklahoma with Brent Venables, because that was kind of his area. That was his thing. That's how he made his name as a recruiter, recruiting these top D linemen and infiltrating Alabama. And then Nick Eason goes in and grabs Peter Woods. But yeah, I mean, I think Peter Woods is the type of defensive lineman that we're going to look up in a couple of years and he's going to be on par with that 2018 group, in my opinion. Like, it feels like we are getting closer and closer to that 2018 group, just with the way that Clemson has dominated the defensive line lately. So yeah, I think we'll look up in a couple of years and that'll be a big, crucial commitment for them to hang on to.
Victor Burley's another defensive line guy on this group. So there's several there. Another, I guess, new coach. He's not new to the staff, but he's new to the position, is offensive line Thomas Austin. He seems to be doing really well in recruiting for not having a lot of experience and kind of jumping into this job.
Yeah, I mean, they've got 3 offensive linemen already. And I think that he's just, this was kind of part of Dabo's plan all along. He knew once Robbie Caldwell retired from on-field coaching, he was going to bring in Thomas Austin. That's why he brought him in. I believe it was an analyst role last year. To kind of get him ready. And I think he just brings a little bit of a fresh perspective. He's younger. He played for Dabo. He played at Clemson. So I think that always goes a really long way. But yeah, I mean, he's gone into the state of Texas, gotten Harris Sewell and Ian Reed, 2 4-stars from Texas. Harris is a top 100 recruit. And again, just kind of infiltrating a state that has a lot of tradition and a lot of history and a lot of options for these kids to go if they want to stay in state. So I give him a lot of credit in that regard as well.
Grace, is there a guy in this 2023 class that maybe you think people aren't talking enough about who might be a surprise?
Ooh, I do think you mentioned him a little bit, Vic Burley. Like, I think people are talking about him, but I think he gets maybe not lost in the shuffle because of Peter Woods, them hauling such a huge 5-star in Peter Woods. Sometimes, as soon as they got Woods, I was like, oh yeah, we need to not forget about Burley. I mean, this guy's like a top 50 recruit. So he's one. Avion Terrell, I think, is one that we don't talk about a lot, and they were really high on him early. AJ Terrell's younger brother out of Atlanta. He got an offer from Clemson as a freshman. So that was someone that they really obviously wanted. And then lately, I mean, I guess maybe I shouldn't call him underrated because he has been getting a lot of buzz, but Ronan Hannafin, I think, was a huge haul for them and someone that they're really excited about.
Is there somebody who you think is next for Clemson as far as committing, or is going to be a while once the season gets started?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, I think that we're at that juncture in the season now where I think we're kind of in the gray area, right? Like, the kids who wanted to get it done with and wanted to commit and make their decision probably took summer officials, have it wrapped up, or are going to have it wrapped up. And then I think anyone who is maybe still a little bit on the fence is probably going to take a fall official, and we'll kind of see where it goes from there. Clemson's fall official is usually pretty late. It's usually in November, I believe, maybe sometimes the last home game of the season. So I don't know. I do think that kids are knocking it out earlier this year, but I do think that there's a group of them that are still kind of out there.
Grace, you wrote a story about the ACC, kind of your overall thoughts on the ACC recruiting, and you can check that out at our website, athletic.com. When you look at the ACC, who is going to step up and challenge Clemson, do you think, in the next couple of years, based on what they're doing recruiting and maybe will do the next couple of years?
I think it's got to be Miami, right? Mario Cristobal. When I wrote this story, Miami had the number 9 class in the country. I know we have a lot of high expectations for Miami this year in year 1 under Cristobal, but I'm more curious about what they look like 2 years from now, 3 years from now, when all of his recruits are in. And so, I mean, he's recruiting offensive linemen really well, which is not a huge surprise. He obviously has the ties to Miami. He has his pitch ready to roll. I think we thought it would be North Carolina, but that has not panned out. So I think it's got to be Miami.
You mentioned North Carolina. Are they slipping a little bit in recruiting? It almost feels like they were the hot team for a couple of years, and now maybe not so much.
They were the hot team, and they signed 3 top 15 classes. And I think too, look, there's still plenty of time to go between now and December, right?
Sure. Right.
But I do think that it is noteworthy that their average player rating is down. And I have to believe that that is the result of a 6-7 season last year. They were recruiting guys in 2021 and 2022 where their average recruiting rating was hovering right around 91, 92, and it's now down to about 89. And so that's fascinating. I think that if they can win the way we expected them to, then this is probably just a blip on the radar and they get right back to it. But they've been really big on wanting to secure their borders and win those in-battle states in North Carolina. And I think right now they've got 1 of the top 5 North Carolina kids committed. They might have another one here in a little bit, but I think they're at a really critical crossroads, if you will.
You mentioned North Carolina. Clemson's always recruited well in North Carolina, but they've always recruited well in Georgia as well.
Yeah.
That's been huge this year, hasn't it? This class is really Georgia heavy going into 2023.
It's super Georgia heavy. I'm looking at it now. So they have 20 commits and 10 of them are from Georgia, which I think is astonishing. From the state of Georgia, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like they have at least 7 4-stars from Georgia, which I think is super fascinating. I think Clemson and Georgia recruit different types of kids. And so in that way, I don't know that they're going head to head for a lot of these kids. I think just what they're looking for is a little bit different, but for them to go in and land 4 top 20 players in the state of Georgia in this class, I think is pretty impressive.
What are the odds that CJ Spiller is going to land a standout running back now that we are in this kind of murky part of the cycle that you talked about?
That is a really good question. And I think has been an interesting part of Clemson's recruiting is just what's going on at running back, because we all know Spiller is one of the greatest players in the Dabo Swinney era. I thought he was the best on-field assistant coach on offense last year, just the way he rotated those guys and the way Shipley and Pace and Maffa played. But they haven't landed a ton of high-power running backs. And I think the big question is, does that change? Because I think that Spiller, just knowing him and knowing his personality, he's totally the type of coach who I think would really succeed on the recruiting trail and do really well. He has as strong of a Clemson pitch as anyone. He has as strong of a Dabo Swinney endorsement as anyone. So I'm curious to see kind of what they haul, but you're right. Like, we are entering the season. We're coming into, late August, early September, and they still don't have their guy. I'm curious to see kind of where that goes and where they end up there, because that has been the one position that's been a little fickle for them.
Yep. And I've wondered if maybe skill positions in general, but especially running back, is hurt by the fact that the offensive line really for 2 years now has underperformed. And if guys are a little reluctant, combine that with the fact that they're 3 deep at running back right now, I don't think necessarily people need to point the finger at Spiller. I think it's just a big challenge for him to address.
For sure. I mean, yeah, like you said, I mean, they are 3 deep, and they're 3. I mean, Kobe Pace is obviously a junior now, but they're 3 young deep for the most part. I mean, Shipley and Maffa are both sophomores. And so that plays into it too. Maybe if you're a recruit and you look up and you see that Pace and Maffa and Shipley are all juniors and or seniors, you're probably like, okay, there's some room for me to get in there. But right now it's a pretty stacked room, and it seems to be pretty stacked for the foreseeable future. So yeah. And then to your point about the O-line, I absolutely think that's part of it. I mean, if you're a running back, you want a strong offensive line. It's not always that simple, but in this case, I think it is. So I think Thomas Austin recruiting it the way he has, and the way that the steps they hope to take on the O-line this year, I think should help with that as well.
Anything else going on? You know the drill. Anything I should have asked about but didn't? Anything you want to bring up?
Oh man, I ask that every interview I do.
That's right.
Clemson's got that Labor Day night season opener in Atlanta, which I think will be fun, and I think we're just all ready to get rolling.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thanks a lot for joining us, Grace Raynor of theathletic.com, and we look forward to reading your stuff all season long, and best of luck to you in the changing beat. We all look forward to keeping tabs on Clemson through The Athletic this year.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you all for having me.
Be sure to check out ClemsonKickoff.com. That's our homepage, where we've got some great resources, links, and more. Well, let's get into the NFL preseason. Some former Tigers managing to open eyes and draw a little attention to their performance. Always tough to tell exactly what it means, but a lot of buzz around not only Trevor Lawrence under new coach Doug Peterson down in Jacksonville, but a healthy Travis Etienne as well.
That's a big key to this, Bill. That's a big word, is healthy. Travis, we know that he got hurt in the preseason last year, did not play during the season, but the clips that you see from him on Twitter, he looks fast. He looks healthy, and he looks ready to go. So I would imagine Jaguar fans are really excited about that, and then maybe even more excited about what they're seeing from Trevor Lawrence. I'll tell you, the player that I saw in the clips from the Jaguars game against the Steelers, Trevor Lawrence looks a lot like the player we saw at Clemson. He looked decisive. His arm looks strong. He looks like he knows where he wants to go with the ball. And everything is working really, really well for him right now. Again, it's preseason, so we'll have to see how it plays out during the year. But I'm telling you, Bill, he looks like a guy who's taken a big step from that rookie year to the second year. And then on top of that, having a competent, legitimate NFL coaching staff has to help him get better. So there were a lot of problems in that coaching staff last year that hurt this team. A lot of bad moves, a lot of wrong moves by that coaching staff. And I think the group that Doug Peterson has put together will fix some of those issues.
It's a big compliment too, because it could have just been like rookie season part 2 with a changeover in staff. You see it a lot, even if sometimes just the staff changes a coordinator, becomes a setback and you don't get that true, okay, rookie mistakes are out of the way and now I'm ready to step forward. But if Lawrence looks as confident as he does, and this staff is really bringing him along and saying, here's the mistakes and we're going to apply those and we're going to develop you, rather than force a square peg into a round hole and force a system in there that has to be totally relearned from scratch, that's a chance for them. Now, they're still going to have trouble along the offensive line. The defense is still kind of leaky, but the skill positions might be looking really, really good, and that'll at least put some highlights and hopefully a few wins under Lawrence's belt.
Yeah, they're not a good team. We know that. They've been a bad team for a couple of years. You don't draft number 1 in back-to-back drafts because you had a good team. That's what the Jaguars have done. But if you can at least be confident in what the coaching staff is teaching you, and I don't think last year they believed in that coaching staff, and probably with good reason. So that has to help this team move forward. So we'll see how it plays out. Really excited about what the Jaguars have and what they can turn their team into going into 2022, and then maybe take a big step next year as they continue to add good players.
Also wanted to look out to Kansas City, and we thought we'd be seeing Justin Ross open some eyeballs out there. He had earned some accolades very early in camp before getting hurt with his latest injury, but now apparently it's Tigers alum Cornell Powell who has drawn some compliments lately and might work his way into the rotation.
It's funny, Bill, because, Cornell Powell was a good player at Clemson, but never really seemed to take that next step until his senior year. And then he really took off. And we know the kind of senior year he had for this program. And remember the game he had at Notre Dame. I mean, he had one of the best games we've ever seen from a Clemson wide receiver in that loss at Notre Dame. So it's good to see him get his chance here. And we know that how hard of a worker he is and what he does to continue to play well and improve his game. We'll see if he can carry that over into the season.
Another wide receiver garnering some compliments is Dion Kane, and he's up in Philly.
Dion Kane has looked good. I've read a lot of reports on him, checking out some clips of him on social media. He looks, again, like a guy that played at Clemson. He's kind of wandered around in his pro career a little bit, but now he looks, again, like he did when he played for Clemson, especially that last year he was with the Tigers. So, again, you have to wait and see because it's preseason, but I think you've got to be excited about what you're seeing from Dion Kane right now.
He's trying to work his way into the ranks of reliable NFL players. One who has is another Tiger originally from the Tampa area, and that's Ray Mcleod. I know you're keeping tabs on him because you follow the Niners so closely.
Yeah, big Niners fan here and really excited about Ray. And Ray has played well early on, and he getting lots of good reports on Ray. So they signed him as a special teams guy, return punts, return kicks, those kinds of things. But he's also stepped up at receiver, and he's gotten some good chances there. So that's one that, as I follow every 49ers game and throw stuff at the TV and yell about the Niners, I'll definitely be keeping an eye on Ray this year.
So even with Nuke Hopkins sidelined, you've got some potential wide receiver U candidates out there. And then I don't know if you saw this one, Daniel. I should have mentioned this before the show. Hunter Renfro getting a big compliment the other day from NFL defensive back counterpart Derwin James.
I did, and Hunter, he got paid this offseason, and he's been a big part of that Raiders team the last couple of years. And it's funny, Bill, people continually are surprised by Hunter Renfro and the things that he can do. We're not, because we saw it for several years as he was a player at Clemson. So he's a terrific player. He adds a lot to any offense he's a part of, and I'm sure Derek Carr is really excited to have him on his team.
That was on the podcast The Pivot, where Derwin James was talking about Renfro, and the hosts kind of challenged him a little bit, and he held strong and said, "No, let me tell you, and here's what's going on. This guy's legitimate." He's just come a long way from that walk on, and the guy didn't know how to shop for grapes, and just an all-around good football player. Had that potentially game-saving tackle on the fumble in the title game in Tampa, being able to prevent that from being a scoop and score touchdown. And then you've also seen him with the tackle on special teams on the fake punt, where he was able to come up and make a big hit and make sure that the Raiders got the ball back on downs. So making his mark, admittedly to me, in ways that I never saw coming out of Renfro. You just look at certain players, you don't know if they're going to always have been, wow, that great college player who never quite could take that extra quarter step to be a big time NFL player. Renfro, boy, there's got to be a movie in that, right?
Yeah, you would think so. And I would hope they include that tackle against Alabama. I know that he scored the winning touchdown and everybody talks about that, but don't forget about that tackle, because that tackle was a huge play in that game.
Well, if any news breaks in the next few days, we'll react to that as well, and we'll talk about what it means for the Tigers. Daniel, you got a few things you're looking at coming up?
As always, Bill, I'm looking at recruiting and wondering what's next for the Tigers. Who's next out there to commit to the Tigers? And could that be Caden McDonald? It's a little bit of ways away, as he has set his commitment date for October, but we'll see where the Tigers stand with him, and maybe they can add him to this 2023 class.
And we'll have men's soccer starting up this week as well. We'll keep an eye on them, won't we?
We will. We have to pay attention to the defending national champions. It's good to say that, isn't it? And the number one team in the nation for this year going into the season. So I'm always watching the soccer team, the women's team as well. They started their year with a tie and then got a win Sunday. And then the volleyball team is getting started soon as well. So busy times on the campus, and I love every bit of it.
A lot going on and always a lot of energy in and around Death Valley. Well, I hope everyone has enjoyed this one, and we're glad you found us, Clemson family. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, follow button if it's on a podcast. You can stay up to speed every time we react to the big news that's happening around Clemson athletics. We want to be able to keep this a free podcast. Our homepage has great resources and an easy-to-read schedule. We'll post kickoff times as they're announced as well, so be sure to check that out, clemsonkickoff.com. You can also play all our episodes in our shorts there. We've previewed all the positions of the Tigers for 2022. We've previewed all the opponents on the schedule this year, and we link to all the podcast apps that we post to as well. You can also follow us on Twitter at Clemson Kickoff. We'll retweet news there as it happens, give quick hit opinions in real time every now and then. Until the next episode, I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers. You had Travis Lawrence.
There is a Trevor Etienne, though.
Yes, there is. That's why he plays for Florida. All right.
Doing great.